My mom insisted on $200,000 for his luxury estate the night the chandeliers trembled like they were holding their breath. Rain threaded silver lines down the windows, and every drop sounded like a quiet accusation. The dining table still smelled of lemon polish and old brass, the same table where my father used to tap his knuckles when he was thinking. She slid a thick folder toward me, perfectly manicured nails clicking against the wood. "Sign this and we're done," she said, as if this were paperwork for a grocery return. A cold spoon rested in my palm. Ordinary metal, yet suddenly heavy with every unspoken year between us. The house creaked like it was remembering something I wasn't ready to face. My younger brother stared at his plate, pretending to disappear. "Hi everyone, my name is Adrian Brooks. I've spent most of my life learning how to make myself softer so other people could stay comfortable." That night my softness felt dangerous. I said no. The word barely rose above a whisper, but it didn't bend. Her smile cracked so fast it almost didn't exist. She laughed, sharp, hollow, wrong, and slid another document across the table. An $800,000 lawsuit already stamped, already alive without me. My reflection wavered on the polished wood like I was drowning in it. I pictured my father at dawn, watering his roses, speaking to them like they could still answer. The rain hammered harder now, urgent, rhythmic, impossible to ignore. As my mother stood and gathered her coat, the house stopped feeling like a home. It felt like a courtroom waiting to open its doors. And somewhere downtown, a judge had already begun listening. She left without looking back. The front door clicked shut like a verdict, and the sound rolled through the hallway, rattling picture frames of my father in his navy jacket, sunburned, laughing at nothing. The rain softened again, then went still, the kind of silence that feels louder than thunder. My brother finally exhaled. His fork clinked against porcelain, a tiny, useless noise in a house that suddenly felt enormous. I stayed seated, hands flat on the table, breathing with the slow rhythm my father taught me when I was a kid and afraid of storms. The lawsuit folder was still there. Thick, hungry, heavy with words that didn't care about memory. I didn't touch it. Instead, I walked through the estate room by room, as if taking inventory of a life that was about to be cut into pieces. The air smelled like cedar and old books. In my father's study, his fountain pen rested exactly where he left it, capped, balanced, waiting. I sat in his leather chair and felt absurdly small. On his desk lay a photograph I had forgotten. Me at 16, mud on my jeans, him behind me with his hands on my shoulders. His eyes in that picture were steady, unafraid of hard choices. My phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "You forced this." I stared at the words until they blurred, then placed the phone face down beside the pen. Outside, a single rose drooped under the weight of last night's rain. I stepped onto the patio, shoes soaking in the wet grass, and cut that rose clean from the stem. The cut was quick, precise, not cruel, just final. In my palm, the petals trembled. And for the first time since she left, I felt something shift. Not anger, not defiance, but a quiet resolve that would not let me look away. At dawn, the estate looked different, softer, almost apologetic. Mist hung low over the lawn like a slow breath, blurring the edges of everything I thought I knew. I stood at the kitchen window with a mug of black coffee, watching a gardener I barely recognized move through the roses my father planted by hand. The kettle clicked behind me. I didn't move. On the counter lay the lawsuit folder, reopened, its pages fanned out like a bird that had tried to fly and failed. I skimmed the lines again, claims of entitlement, promise, moral debt. None of them sounded like my mother's voice. They sounded like a machine wearing her name. My phone rang. A known number. I answered. A calm woman spoke, a clerk from the courthouse, professional, careful, human in the small pauses. She confirmed the hearing date and said almost gently, "You may want counsel." I thanked her, hung up, and felt my pulse in my throat. In my father's study, dust floated in a pale column of morning light. His chair creaked as I sat down. I touched the edge of his desk, tracing a tiny scratch where he once slammed a stapler in frustration and then laughed at himself. On the blotter lay a sealed envelope I hadn't noticed before, my name written in his careful, deliberate script. I hesitated. For a long moment, I simply listened, the gardener's shears clicking outside, a distant train, the house breathing around me. When I finally opened it, a single sheet slid out. No instructions. No lectures. Just 3 words. Choose with clarity. My chest tightened in a way that hurt and steadied me at the same time. Outside, the gardener cut another rose, clean, decisive, and lifted it toward the sun. I folded the letter slowly, placed it beside the pen, and felt the weight of my father's trust settle into my bones. A weight that felt nothing like the lawsuit and everything like a path. The hearing was still weeks away, but the house began acting like a courtroom anyway. Every footstep sounded measured. Every object felt exhibit-ready: the china cabinet, the stair rail, my father's crooked lamp. Even the roses outside seemed to stand straighter, as if aware of being observed. I spent the morning in the attic. Dust rose in soft clouds when I lifted boxes I hadn't touched since college. Old photo albums, my father's business ledgers, a chipped model sailboat he built with me when I was 12. The smell of cardboard and cedar made my throat tighten. In one box I found letters, dozens of them, written by my mother to my father years ago. Tender, patient, careful. Words that felt like a different woman entirely. I sat on the attic floor and read one at random. I trust you with our future. The sentence lingered in the stale air like a ghost. Downstairs, my brother's voice floated up the stairwell. He was on the phone, low, anxious, trying not to be heard. I caught only fragments. Lawsuit, Mom? I don't know what to do. I closed the box gently as if it might break. Back in the study, I laid the letters beside my father's pen and the sealed note. 3 quiet artifacts, all pointing in different directions. Past, present, and something I couldn't yet name. My phone buzzed again. This time a text from my mother. You're embarrassing the family. I looked at the words, then at my father's letter. I didn't reply. Instead I stepped outside. The gardener had finished his work. The lawn shimmered with dew. One rose lay clipped and waiting on the stone wall as if placed there intentionally. I picked it up. It wasn't perfect, a torn petal, a slight bruise, but it was real. In that small imperfection I felt my answer beginning to form. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady enough to carry me forward. By midweek, the house felt less like a refuge and more like a memory I was trying to keep alive with my hands. I began cataloging things, not for the court but for myself. I walked slowly from room to room with a small notebook, writing down what mattered. The dent in the banister where my father once stumbled laughing, the faint ring on the coffee table from his favorite mug, the crack in the study window shaped like a lightning bolt. Each mark felt like a pulse. In the afternoon, my brother arrived without calling. His shoulders were tight, his eyes bloodshot, as if he'd been carrying something far heavier than he admitted. We sat on the back steps, feet dangling above the wet grass. He didn't defend our mother. He didn't attack me either. He simply said, "She's scared of disappearing." I turned that over in my mind. From the garden drifted the smell of cut stems, green, sharp, alive. The roses looked almost too vivid in the pale light, as if they knew their time was fragile. Inside, I spread my father's old ledgers across the dining table. Neat columns, careful ink, a lifetime of decisions made without spectacle. On the last page he had written one line in the margin. Legacy is not possession. It is practice. My chest tightened. That evening I drafted a letter, not to the court, not to my mother, but to myself. I wrote until my hand cramped, until the room grew dark around me. When I finished, I placed it beside my father's note. Outside, the wind moved through the roses like a slow breath. One petal detached and spiraled to the ground at my feet. I picked it up, feeling its softness against my palm, and understood that holding on sometimes meant knowing what to release. The courthouse smelled like cold stone and old paper. I arrived early, palms damp, heart measured and stubborn. Sunlight slipped through tall windows in thin, unforgiving columns that cut the room into bright and shadowed halves. Exactly how everything in my life felt. My mother was already there. She sat ramrod straight, hair immaculate, expression armored. For a moment, our eyes met across the marble floor. I searched for the woman who once tucked blankets around my feet during storms. What I saw instead was someone afraid of shrinking. The clerk called our names. Footsteps echoed like distant drums. Inside the courtroom, wood creaked under the weight of quiet history. The judge listened more than he spoke, pen poised, face unreadable, patience heavy as gravity. My mother's lawyer spoke first, all polished certainty in large numbers. Words like entitlement, obligation, lifestyle, security floated above us like smoke. When my turn came, my throat tightened, not with rage but with something cleaner. I didn't attack her. I didn't plead. I simply told the story of the house, the roses, the dented banister, my father's note that said choose with clarity. I spoke about practice, not possession, and how money without meaning could hollow even a mansion. Silence followed, deep enough to hear the HVAC breathe. The judge folded his hands. He didn't rule that day. Instead, he asked one question that landed like a stone dropped into water. "Mrs. Brooks, what are you actually afraid of losing?" My mother inhaled sharply. Outside, a bell rang somewhere in the city, thin and bright. As we filed out, she brushed past me, close enough that I smelled her familiar perfume, sharper now than I remembered. For the first time, I wasn't sure who was on trial, and the realization felt like a door slowly, quietly opening. That night, the estate felt different, not defeated, not saved, just awake. I walked the long hallway with all the lights off, letting darkness soften the sharp edges of everything. Moonlight spilled across the hardwood like pale water, touching the portraits of my father as if asking permission to stay. In the study, I found my brother sitting in my father's chair, elbows on his knees, staring at the empty desk. He looked older than he had that morning. "I think she's terrified," he said quietly. "Not of losing money. Of losing proof that she still matters." I didn't answer right away. I picked up my father's pen, heavier than it looked, and rolled it slowly between my fingers. Outside, the roses moved with a gentle wind, petals brushing one another like whispered conversation. The gardener had left a single clipped stem resting against the stone wall again, deliberate this time. My phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "Meet me tomorrow. Just us. No threats. No lawyers. No capital letters." I stared at the screen until the glow burned my eyes. I stepped onto the patio. Grass soaked my shoes, cold and honest. I took the clipped rose in my hand and held it up to the moon, watching its edges glow silver. For a moment I imagined selling the house. Clean break, easy answer. Then I pictured my father at dawn, watering each plant like a promise he renewed daily. Back inside, I placed the rose beside his letter. "Choose with clarity." My brother lingered in the doorway. "Whatever you decide," he said, "I'll stand with you." I looked at the dark hallway, the quiet rooms, the breathing house, and at the phone in my hand. Tomorrow, I would sit across from my mother without documents, without armor, without an audience. And for the first time since the lawsuit began, I felt the choice arrive not as pressure, but as something calm, clear, and unmistakably mine. We met at the estate at sunrise. My mother arrived before I did, standing on the back patio, coat wrapped tight, eyes fixed on the roses as if they were speaking a language she had forgotten how to hear. I didn't set the table. I didn't bring lawyers. I brought only my father's letter folded once in my pocket. For a long time neither of us spoke. The gardener moved quietly in the distance, shears clicking like a slow clock. Finally she turned to me. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. "I don't want the house," she said, and the sentence seemed to surprise even her. "I want proof that I didn't disappear when he did." I handed her my father's note. She read it once, then again, fingers trembling. When she finished, tears slipped down her face, not dramatic, not loud, just human. I told her I would keep the estate, but not as property. I would turn it into a community garden in my father's name. Free classes, open gates, shared harvest. The house would remain our family's, but the land would belong to everyone. She didn't argue. Instead, she placed her hand on the rose bush my father loved most and whispered, "He would have liked this." Weeks later, in court, she withdrew the lawsuit herself. No victory speech. No spectacle. Just a signature that felt lighter than air. At dusk, I stood alone on the patio, soil under my nails, neighbors walking through the open gate for the first time. The house glowed warm behind me, still ours but no longer a cage. I realized then that justice hadn't arrived as punishment. It arrived as restoration. And in that quiet, growing field of roses, I felt my father's presence not as memory, but as living practice.